The kitchen light was on longer than it needed to be. Daniel noticed that first, before the voices, before any of it. 34 years of anniversaries taught a man to notice which lights stayed on after the guests thinned out, and this one had been burning through 2 rounds of decaf. He was headed for it when he heard Carol laugh. Not her party laugh. The real one. Loose and a little too loud. The wine doing what wine did to her after 9 o'clock. 34 years, Carol was saying. You'd think he'd have figured it out by now. Figured what out? Renee's voice. Amused. Easy. Don't act like you don't know what I mean. A pause. A clink of a glass set down too hard. He's sweet. He's loyal. Renee, I love that man to death. But he's always been a little terrible in bed. Always. Since day one. Daniel stopped walking. It wasn't the words that stopped him. Carol had said worse to his face, laughing, a hand on his knee. The two of them old enough now to find their own shortcomings funny. It was that Renee didn't laugh back. There was a silence. Not a long one. A half-second. Maybe less. The kind of pause a person only catches if they've spent 2 years of their life learning the exact rhythm of someone's voice, the exact shape of the space before she says something she's decided, in that instant, to say anyway. He wasn't terrible with me. Quiet, almost to herself, almost like she hadn't meant it to leave the kitchen at all. Daniel's heart did something ugly and immediate. Not guilt, not yet. Just the animal jolt of hearing his name attached to a sentence he was never supposed to hear. She didn't mean that. She meant it as a joke. People joke. But there had been no laugh after it. That was the part his mind kept snagging on, standing there in the hallway with a stack of dessert plates he didn't remember picking up. Carol hadn't laughed either. Maybe she hadn't caught it. The wine, the noise of the dishwasher, the radio low on the counter. Maybe it had passed her by clean. He should have kept walking. Back to the living room, back to the coffee table, back to being a man at his own anniversary party who hadn't heard anything at all. Instead, he stood there a second too long. And when Renee turned, reaching for a dish towel, some ordinary motion, she saw him. Her face did 3 things in under a second. Surprise. Then something harder to name, something that flickered and was gone before he could read it. Then last, the smooth, practiced calm of a woman who had spent 40 years learning how not to be caught. Daniel. Even. Pleasant. We were just finishing up in here. I can see that. His voice came out steadier than he felt, which surprised him. Carol turned too, glass in hand, grinning without a trace of self-consciousness. Oh, good. You're just in time to defend your honor. I was telling Renee you're a terrible lover, and she's taking your side. Is she? He made himself smile. It wasn't hard. 34 years of practice made it easy, made it automatic. A muscle that moved on its own, even while something else in him stood very still. I said no such thing, Renee said, folding the towel with more care than a towel required. I said you two clearly still like each other, which is more than I can say for most marriages that make it this far. It was a good save. Smooth. The kind of thing you'd only notice was a save if you already knew there was something underneath it to cover. Carol laughed again, satisfied, already moving past it, already reaching for the last of the wine to top off her own glass. That's the nicest thing you've said all night. I have my moments. Daniel set the dessert plates down on the counter because his hands needed something to do. He didn't look at Renee. He was aware, with a clarity that unsettled him, of exactly where she was standing, exactly how far from him, in the way a person is aware of a step missing in a staircase they've climbed 1,000 times. It was 30 years ago. It doesn't mean anything. She was being kind. People say kind things at parties. He almost believed it. I should get going, Renee said, setting the folded towel down with a finality that felt, to Daniel, like the closing of something. Early morning. Carol, dinner was wonderful. Daniel. And here, for just a moment, her eyes came up and found his, and held there half a second longer than a goodbye required. Happy anniversary. Thank you, he said. 2 words. He couldn't have managed more if he'd tried. Carol walked her to the door, the two of them talking easily about nothing. A lunch they were planning, someone's daughter's wedding. And Daniel stood alone in his kitchen under the light that had been on too long, listening to his wife say goodbye to her best friend, and thinking about a half-second of silence that shouldn't have meant anything at all. It doesn't mean anything, he told himself again, and started clearing the rest of the plates. But some part of him, small, quiet, the part he'd have denied out loud to anyone who asked, was already turning the sentence over. Turning it the way you turn a coin you've been told is worthless, just to check. He wasn't terrible with me. He heard the front door close, heard Carol's footsteps coming back down the hall, humming something under her breath. Happy, half-drunk, utterly unaware. He was still standing at the counter when she came in and slipped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back, the way she'd done for 3 decades. Good night, she murmured. Best one in a long time. Yeah, Daniel said, and meant it, and didn't understand why meaning it didn't make the other thing go quiet. He turned off the kitchen light. In the dark, for just a second, he thought of Renee's face in that half-second before she'd covered it, and found he couldn't say, even to himself, what exactly he'd seen there. Carol texted him the following Thursday from her sister's driveway, already running behind, already apologizing before she'd asked for anything. Renee's dropping the good serving dish back by around 4. Can you grab it? I won't be home till 6. Traffic's a mess. Daniel read the text twice. Then he set his phone face down on the counter, which was a foolish thing to do, since it didn't change what it said. He told himself it was nothing, a dish, a doorstep exchange, 30 seconds, maybe a minute, if she wanted to chat about the weather. He'd done 1,000 of these in 34 years of marriage, picking up things, dropping off things, the small domestic traffic of 2 families that had folded into each other over decades. At 4 o'clock, he was in the kitchen pretending to read the newspaper he'd already read that morning. At 4:06, the doorbell rang. Renee stood on the porch with the dish held against her hip, like she'd carried it that way her whole life, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, and for a moment, neither of them said anything at all. Carol said 4, she offered, as if an explanation were needed for punctuality. She's stuck in traffic. I'm just the delivery service today. He stepped back from the door, an invitation he almost didn't mean to extend. Come in a second. It's hot out there. She hesitated. He saw it, the small flicker of should I, and then came in anyway. The kitchen felt smaller with her in it than it had with a room full of anniversary guests. She set the dish on the counter, careful, the way she'd folded that towel. Neither of them mentioned Saturday. It sat between them anyway, taking up space the way an unopened letter takes up space on a desk you keep walking past. You've been quiet since the party, Renee said finally, not looking at him, straightening the dish so it sat square to the counter's edge. Carol mentioned it, said you seemed off. I'm fine. Daniel, just his name. But she said it the way she used to say it, 30 years dropping away in 2 syllables, and something in his chest turned over, slow and unwilling. I heard what you said, he told her. No point pretending otherwise. She clearly already knew. In the kitchen, the silence that followed was longer than the one at the party. He watched her decide something. I know you did, she said quietly. I saw your face. Why'd you say it? Because it's true. She said it simply, without drama, which somehow made it land harder than if she'd made a scene of it. I wasn't trying to start anything, Daniel. Carol was teasing you, the way she does. And it came out before I thought about it. I didn't mean for you to hear it. I definitely didn't mean for her not to. She didn't. I know. He leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, putting distance into his own posture, because he didn't trust himself not to close it otherwise. It's been 30 years, Renee. I know how long it's been. Something flickered across her face. Not quite a smile, not quite its opposite. I was your first serious anything. You don't forget that, no matter how many decades sit on top of it. He should have laughed it off. Should have said ancient history and refilled 2 glasses of water and let the conversation drift somewhere safer. Her flight home, Carol's sister, anything. Instead, he heard himself ask, do you ever think about it? What would have happened if you hadn't taken that job? He regretted it the instant it left his mouth. Not because it was untrue. He had wondered it, on and off, for 3 decades, the way a person wonders about any road not taken, but because asking it out loud gave it a kind of weight it hadn't had while it stayed silent in his head. Renee didn't answer right away. She looked at him, really looked, the way people rarely did anymore. Most conversations these days conducted at half attention, phones in hand, one eye on some other task. Renee looked at him like there was nothing else in the room worth looking at. Sometimes, she said finally. Not often, but sometimes. The kitchen clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower started up, ordinary and far away. I should go, Renee said, but she didn't move toward the door. Before Carol gets back and finds us standing here having this conversation. We're not having any conversation. We're just talking. Are we? It wasn't really a question. She picked up her bag from the chair where she'd set it, slid her sunglasses back down, and this time she did move toward the door. Daniel following a half step behind, out of nothing but old habit. See the guest out. Close the door. Ordinary manners for an ordinary visit. At the door, she paused, hand on the frame, and looked back at him. For what it's worth, she said. I never actually thought you were terrible, just so we're clear. She was smiling when she said it, light, like she meant it as nothing more than a parting joke to send him off with. But her eyes didn't quite match the smile, and she held the look a beat longer than the joke required, long enough that Daniel felt the question underneath it, the one she hadn't asked out loud. Have you ever wondered? Drive safe, he said, which was not an answer to anything, and she laughed softly. At him, or at herself, he couldn't tell, and walked to her car without looking back. Daniel stood in the doorway until she'd pulled out of the driveway. Then he went back to the kitchen, picked up the serving dish, and stood holding it for a long moment before he remembered what he'd meant to do with it. He still hadn't put it away when Carol got home 2 hours later, kissed him hello, and asked what he'd been doing with his afternoon. Nothing much, he said. Quiet one. It wasn't a lie, exactly, but it wasn't the truth either, and he felt the difference settle into his chest like something he'd have to carry now, whether he wanted to or not. Carol left for her sister's on Friday afternoon, with a suitcase and a promise to be back Sunday evening. Diane's knee surgery, 3 days of casseroles and daytime television. The kind of trip Daniel usually welcomed for the quiet it left behind. This time, the quiet felt different. Heavier, like a room holding its breath. He told himself he wasn't thinking about Renee. He told himself that Saturday morning, and again Saturday afternoon. And by Saturday evening, he'd told himself so many times that the telling itself had started to feel like proof of the opposite. The knock came a little after 7, just as the light was turning gold and long across the living room floor. "I know this is strange," Renee said, standing on the porch with a book in her hands. His book, he realized. The one he'd lent Carol 2 Christmases ago and never gotten back. "Carol asked me to return this before I forgot again. I didn't realize she wasn't home." It was, Daniel thought, a remarkably thin excuse. He didn't say so. "She's at Diane's till Sunday." "Oh." Renee didn't move to leave. "Well, I drove all this way." He should have taken the book at the door, thanked her, said goodnight, closed it gently behind her the way a sensible man closes a door on something he has no business opening. Instead, he stepped back, the second time in 2 weeks he'd made that same small, fatal gesture of invitation, and said, "Come in for a minute. I'll get you something cold to drink, at least, for the trouble." They sat on the back porch because the kitchen had felt too much like the last time, and neither of them, without saying so, wanted to repeat it. The evening was warm and close, cicadas working themselves into a slow chorus, the sky doing something soft and orange over the fence line. They talked about nothing at first. Her flight home tomorrow, Carol's sister's knee, a mutual friend's grandchild. The kind of conversation that fills space without asking anything of the people having it. Then, in a lull, Renee said, "I keep thinking about what I said. At the party." "I know. I shouldn't have said it. You already told me that. I'm telling you again." She turned her glass slowly in her hands, not looking at him. "Because I don't think I mean it the way I meant it the first time." Daniel felt something in his chest go very still. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been telling myself for 2 weeks that it slipped out, that it didn't mean anything." She looked up at him now, and her eyes in the fading light looked older and younger at once, the way a face sometimes does when it drops whatever it's been holding up. "But it's been 30 years, Daniel, and I still remember exactly what it felt like to be looked at by you, and I don't think that's nothing." He should have said something to close the door on it right there. A joke, a gentle correction. We're not those people anymore. Any of a dozen sentences that would have ended the evening cleanly and sent her home with the book returned and nothing else exchanged. Instead, he said, quietly, "I think about it too. More than I should." The cicadas kept singing. Neither of them moved for a long moment. And then her hand, resting on the arm of the chair between them, shifted an inch, not quite touching his. Close enough that the space between them became its own kind of statement. "We shouldn't," she said. Not a question, barely even a protest. "No," he agreed. "We shouldn't." Neither of them moved away. The porch light hadn't come on yet. The timer set for full dark, still a few minutes off. And in the dimness, her face was mostly shadow, mostly shape. The specifics of 30 years softened out of it, so that for one unsteady moment, he could almost see the 22-year-old she'd been, and feel, underneath his own ribs, something like the 24-year-old he'd been across from her. Her hand closed the last inch of distance. His breath caught before hers did. "Daniel." He never found out what she meant to say after his name. He leaned in, or she did. He would never afterward be entirely sure which of them moved first, only that the space between them closed, and then there was no space at all. Her hand at his jaw. The smell of her perfume, unfamiliar, and 30 years familiar at once. The kiss brief and soft, and utterly unlike anything careless. It lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then he pulled back, sharply, like something had burned him, and the porch light chose that exact moment to click on, flooding them both in sudden white light that felt less like illumination than like judgment. "Oh, God!" Renee's hand went to her own mouth. "Daniel, I need you to go." His voice came out rough, unrecognizable to his own ears. Not angry. Something worse than angry. Ashamed. Undone. A man standing in the wreckage of his own 34 years, watching it list sideways in real time. I know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. Please." He wasn't looking at her now. He was looking at his own hands, gripping the arms of the chair like they were the only solid thing left in the yard. "Just go." She went. He heard her car start in the driveway, heard it pull away too fast down the quiet street. And then he was alone on the porch with the light too bright above him, and Carol's voice already, unbearably, in his head. He's always been a little terrible in bed, but I love him anyway. And underneath it, worse, his own voice, asking a question he couldn't yet answer. What have I done? He sat there a long time after the cicadas quieted. The book Renee had never actually given him still sitting, forgotten, on the porch table between the two empty glasses. He didn't sleep. He lay in the bed he'd shared with Carol for 34 years, staring at a ceiling he could have drawn from memory, and ran the same 3 seconds over and over until they stopped feeling real, until the kiss became something that had happened to somebody else, some other Daniel, a man he didn't recognize and couldn't quite disown. By morning, he'd made a decision, unmade it, and made a different one. 4 separate times. Tell Carol. Tell her everything. Tonight. The second she walks through the door, and let the chips fall where they fall. Say nothing. It was 3 seconds. It will never happen again. Nobody has to carry this but you. Call Renee. Hear her voice. Make sure she understands this was a mistake, that whatever door had cracked open on that porch was closing now, permanently, before either of them did something they couldn't undo. He chose the third one because it felt like the only one he could survive doing first. She picked up on the second ring, like she'd been waiting with the phone in her hand. Daniel. Just his name again. She'd always said it like it meant something. We need to talk about last night. I know. A pause, breath inaudible on the line. I haven't stopped thinking about it. It can't happen again. He said it fast, before he could let himself soften it. Renee, I love my wife. I've loved her for 34 years. Last night was a mistake. My mistake as much as yours. And it ends there. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that he thought the call had dropped. Is that what you want? She asked finally. Or is that what you think you're supposed to want? The question landed somewhere he didn't have a ready answer for, and his hesitation, half a second, no more, told her everything she needed to know. Daniel, I'm not trying to break up your marriage. I want you to know that. I'm 66 years old. I'm not looking to blow up my whole life over a porch light and an old feeling. Her voice was steady now, gentler than he expected. But I'm also not going to sit here and pretend that kiss didn't mean something, because I think we'd both be lying, and I think you know it. It doesn't matter what it meant. His voice cracked on the last word, and he hated himself for it. It can't matter. Carol doesn't deserve... He stopped. Started again. She doesn't deserve any part of this. No, Renee said quietly. She doesn't. Another silence. This one felt different. Not charged, just sad. 2 people standing at the edge of something they'd both, separately and together, decided not to fall into. So what happens now? She asked. He thought of Carol's laugh in the kitchen. 34 years of it. Not just that night. Every night. Every ordinary evening stacked on top of the last one, until they'd built something neither of them examined too closely anymore, because it was simply there. The way a house is there. The way a life is there. He thought about how easy it had been to almost lose sight of that, sitting in the dark with someone who remembered a version of him from before any of it existed. "Now," Daniel said slowly, "I think you and I need some distance. Not forever, but for a while. Long enough that this stops feeling like something unfinished. And Carol?" This was the part he'd been circling all night, the part he still didn't have a clean answer for. Confession felt honest, and also felt like handing his wife a wound she'd have to carry the rest of her life for one mistake that would never happen again. Silence felt like protection, and also felt like exactly the kind of quiet lie he'd told himself he'd never tell her. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "I need to think about what I owe her. The truth, or peace. I'm not sure yet which one is really the kinder thing. That's an honest answer, at least." He could hear something in her voice loosen, some tension she'd been holding since he'd picked up the phone. "For what it's worth, I think you're a good man, Daniel. I think that's part of why I let myself forget, for about 10 seconds last night, that good men still have to choose to stay that way. Every day, not just once. I know. I'll see myself out of your life for a while. Carol will notice if I disappear completely. I won't do that to her. She doesn't deserve to lose a friend over something she doesn't know happened. But I'll keep my distance from you. That much I can do." "Thank you," he said, and meant it more than the words could carry. He hung up the phone and sat at the kitchen table for a long time, in the same chair he'd sat in for 3 decades of ordinary mornings, and thought about Carol's key already turning in the lock tomorrow evening, her voice already calling out, "I'm home," the way it always did, cheerful and certain and utterly unaware of the 3 seconds that had almost cost her everything. He still hadn't decided by the time he finally went to bed whether he would tell her, but he knew, with a clarity that felt like the first honest thing he'd thought in 2 weeks, exactly what he wanted the rest of his life to look like. And for the first time since the anniversary party, that certainty felt like solid ground under his feet, instead of something he was reaching for in the dark. Carol came home Sunday evening exactly the way he'd imagined it. Keys in the lock, her voice calling out before the door had even fully opened. A grocery bag balanced on one hip because she'd stopped for the ingredients to the pasta she made every time she'd been away. "I missed you," she said, and kissed him hello like it was nothing, like it was everything. Like 34 years of ordinary evenings, compressed into one small gesture she didn't have to think about anymore. He held her a beat longer than usual. She noticed. She always noticed. That was the thing about a marriage this long. How little escaped a person who'd spent 3 decades learning your weather, and pulled back to look at him. "You okay?" He'd had 2 days to decide what he owed her. He still wasn't entirely certain he'd landed on the right answer. But standing in his own kitchen with his wife's hand still resting on his chest, he knew finally which answer he could actually live inside. "I've just been thinking," he said, "about how long we've been doing this. 34 years. That's a strange thing to look sad about. I'm not sad." And he found, saying it, that it was true. "I think I just forgot, somewhere along the way, to notice it. All of it. I've been taking the ordinary parts for granted, like they'd just always be there, so I didn't have to pay attention to them." Carol studied him for a moment, the particular look she gave him when she suspected there was more under a sentence than the sentence itself was offering. He waited for the question. It didn't come. Maybe she decided not to ask. Maybe, in 34 years, she'd learned there were some doors a marriage did better left closed, so long as what was behind them stayed there. "Well," she said instead, settling for what he'd given her. "I'm paying attention now. Does that count?" It counts. He never told her about the porch, or the 3 seconds, or the 2 nights he'd spent deciding what kind of man he wanted to be for the rest of whatever years they had left. He'd turned it over more times than he could count in the days after, and had come to something he believed, in the end, was true. That Carol didn't need the weight of a mistake he'd already stopped himself from repeating. What she needed, what he owed her, more than confession, was a husband who showed up, fully, for the years still in front of them. Not a man unburdening his conscience at her expense. He called it kindness. Some nights, lying awake, he wondered if it was only cowardice wearing kindness as clothes. He decided, eventually, that it could be both, and that he'd have to live with not knowing for certain which one it was. Renee kept her word. She didn't disappear from Carol's life. She came to Thanksgiving that year. Hugged Daniel hello with the easy, careful distance of 2 people who'd agreed, without ever saying so again, on exactly how close they were allowed to stand. There was no more silence a half-second too long. No more sentences that meant more than their words. Just an old friend at the table, the way she'd always been before that one night on the porch, had briefly, dangerously, threatened to make her something else. Daniel changed, in the months after, not dramatically, not in any way Carol could have pointed to and named. He started noticing things again. The particular way she hummed while she cooked. The stubborn set of her jaw when she was pretending not to be annoyed with him. The small, unremarkable miracle of coming home, every day, to someone who still chose him. At their 35th anniversary, smaller than the year before, just the 2 of them, a quiet dinner at the restaurant where they'd had their first date. Carol raised her glass and made the same joke she always made, softened now with a year's more affection behind it. To 35 years, she said, of putting up with a man who's still, God help me, terrible in bed. He laughed, really laughed, easy and unguarded, and understood, for the first time, that the joke had never been the problem. He was. To 35 years, he said, of getting to keep choosing you anyway. She didn't know what the toast really meant. He hoped she never would have to, but he meant every word of it, in a way he hadn't fully meant anything in longer than he wanted to admit. And as he watched her laugh across the candlelight at a joke only he understood the true weight of, he felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled since the night he stood frozen in a hallway, listening to a silence that lasted half a second too long. He'd been given a second chance to notice what he already had. He didn't intend to waste it again.